Now with this prayer we are now going to see what is the God or who is the God, how he is and how we like him to be. The concept of God, lovely, kindly, helpful or whatever else. What is the concept of God? That is the matter of today's lecture by our friend Sri Dr. Pratosh Acharya. He is in the Department of EEE and CS in the Indian Institute of Science, Bengaluru. And yesterday, as we had circulated the invitation card where he was mentioned as the faculty of that department, somebody asked me, why you are not introducing him as Sudha Pandit? Of course, yes. And he studied Shastras well with our Acharya, Sri Sheshgiri Acharya, for long. And he is well versed in both the sciences. So, how the God is the word that is coined by the Western people maybe 1000 years ago or maybe 2000 years ago. But our concept of Ishvara or Brahman, that is more important, or Devaha, or else as Madhvacharya used Vishnu as the alternative for the God, how we want him to be, how we conceive the God, but what is the theory or the description that we find in Vedas. That is what we want to see now, and I invite Dr. Pratosh to deliver this very important lecture. For sometimes you are not able to, Krishna Bhakti Peetha was not able to organize lectures due to some urgent works and inevitable works, but now again with some gap we are now on the stage, and I welcome all of you, all of our friends and all our students, youngsters especially, because we want to encourage young minds to have the philosophical inquiry, philosophical investigation or the scientific investigation of whatever the things that are found in Shastras, the concepts that are found in Shastra should be circulated and should be conveyed to the young people. That is our effort, that is our aim. So I am very happy many of our young people have come here physically, and it will be recorded and it will be put in our website, YouTube channel as well. I welcome all of you and I welcome Dr. Pratosh to take.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Shuddhanandoru samvidyutibala bahulau darya viryadideham Chinta santapalepoddhava mritimukhara shesha doshati duram Sadbhir vairagya bhakti shrutimati niyatadhyanaja jnana yogad gamyam Vande mukundabhidam amalamalam brahma vedanta vedyam Vyaptariyasya nije nijena mahasa pakshe sapakshe sthitihi Vyavrittischa vipakshatoth vishaye saktirna vaibadhite नैवास्ति प्रतिपक्ष युक्तिरतुलं शुद्धं प्रमाणं समे भूयात् तत्त्वविनिर्णयाय भगवान् अनन्ततीर्थो मुनिः भवति यतनुभावात् एडमूकोऽपि वाग्मी जडमतिरपितन्तुर्जायते प्राज्ञमौलिः सकलवचनचेतो देवता भारती सा मम वचसि निधत्तां सन्निधिं मानसे च आनन्दतीर्थोपदिष्टो निधिर्नारायणह्वयः प्रदर्शितो येन सम्यक् जयतीर्थं तमाश्रये. यो व्यासमुनि दावाग्निः सच्चास्त्र मरुता सह ददाह कुमतारण्यं प्रकाशाय तमाश्रये दुर्वादिध्वान्तरवये वैष्णवेन्दीवरेन्दवे श्रीराघवेन्द्र गुरवे नमो अत्यन्तदयालवे अज्ञानतिमिरच्छेदं बुद्धिसम्पत्प्रदायकं विज्ञानविमलं शान्तं विजयाख्यगुरुं भजे आपादमौलिपर्यन्तं गुरूणाम् आकृतिं स्मरेत् तेन विघ्नाः प्रणश्यन्ति सिद्ध्यन्ति च मनोरथाः श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः I have been tasked with a very difficult job today by Acharya Pandurangi. So if you have seen the title of this talk, it says Understanding God. So I think the title misses a key word. It should have been my understanding of God. Because this has been a question that has been asked by people for millennia, if not more. This question has been tackled by so many people across different geographies of the world and has been done in very different ways. The funny thing is, in spite of all this, even today, there doesn't seem to be a definitive answer to this question. So that's what makes this question so interesting, yet so mysterious. Now, I have a few disclaimers to make before I actually begin my talk. Everything that I'm going to say today, I have not experienced most of them. So all the things that I'll be describing today are the ones that I've read. Okay. So, and then as far as possible, I will try to make it as unbiased, in the sense that I would not give you my opinions. I'll just tell you what different people have thought about regarding this idea called God in different times and different geographies and so on, with a major emphasis on what people of this particular geography called India or Bharat thought about. And at the end of the talk, I'll maybe give you some opinions on what my understanding of that particular idea is. So it's mostly a general informative kind of talk is what I've planned for today. So yeah, so let's begin. As Professor Pandurangi just mentioned, this God has been a term that was coined by the Western people a few centuries ago. If you look at the Indian traditions, there have been multiple words that would associate with this word called God. Now, one, as he rightly mentioned, is that of Ishvara. There is one other word called Brahman. And if you look at the Veda Samhitas, they talk of a word called Deva, Devata, and so on. Now, interestingly, different schools of philosophies ascribe different things to these words. There is no single definition of what Ishvara is. There's no single definition of what Brahman is. There's no single definition of what God is. Right? I mean, even if you look at multiple scriptures. Now, there have been a lot of philosophies or schools of thoughts, darshanas, where this concept of Ishvara or Brahman is not even recognized. One example of that is, of course, the Charvaka school. The other example is the Buddhist school, the Jaina school, and so on. These schools don't even recognize this particular idea of Ishvara or Brahman. And there have been these schools of Vedanta. Okay? where this idea of Brahman has been dealt with, but in different ways. For example, in the Advaita school of philosophy, the idea of Brahman is very different from the idea of Ishvara. And in the Dvaita school of philosophy, the word Ishvara and Brahman point to the same object, and so on. So, what's the most striking fact is that a lot of philosophical schools actually derive very diametrically different opposite ideas from the same set of scriptures. So such is the nature, the obscurity of these scriptures, that they are open to interpretations. So you might be, surprised to know that it is the same Upanishads and the Vedanta Sutras that both school of Dvaita and Advaita derive their idea of Brahman and Ishvara from. And the idea of Brahman and Ishvara in the school of Advaita and the school of Dvaita are very, very different. So different that they almost contradict each other. But they point their source to the same Vedas and Upanishads. That's the very nature of these scriptures. The scriptures themselves go on to say that they are by nature obscure. Paroksha priya ivahi vedaha pratyaksha dvishaha. So these scriptures are designed, if I may use the word in such a way, that they are obscure, that one can extract different kinds of meanings from those scriptures. Now, a lot of people ask me oftentimes that why is it the case? Why are these scriptures designed this way? One of the possible explanations for it is that it says Acharyavan Purusho Veda. The actual knowledge, the correct knowledge has to be preserved. That's why the name Upanishad is something that is covered in Rahasya. Right? I mean, it is not something that is made that is to be made accessible to everyone. So if you seek, you will get. Right? Gurumeva abhigachet samitpanihi shrotriyam brahmanishtam. So one has to go to the guru and seek it from the tradition, and that's why the nature of the obscurity is there. Okay, so now talking of Ishvara and Brahman, right? So see, as I said, given the incredible vast nature of this subject, talking about it in a span of 30-40 minutes is almost impossible. It's just, as I said, there have been scriptures after scriptures deciding or decoding this very question. So the entire Brahma Mimamsa Shastra, right, is designed for this very purpose. Athato Brahma Jignasa, it declares. Right? Let us inquire, let us begin the inquiry of Brahman. So it cannot be sort of covered in about an hour's time, because even if I have to just present one view, or rather, one view of one philosophical school, it would take me multiple days of lectures. That it is, such is the complexity of this particular topic. But let me try to summarize things as much as possible, to the extent possible. So, as I said, whenever you think of something, suppose you want to describe, let's say, an atom, how do you go about it? So if I have to give a lecture on, let's say, atoms, how do I do it? I will first define it, right? Then I will talk about the evidence for its existence. Then I will talk about the nature of the atom and its attributes and qualities. And then we will look into its utilities. Right? One can compartmentalize a discussion on a particular topic in these 4 parts. That's what Shastras also says. You have to do Lakshana, Pramana, and then Pramana Pariksha, and then you see what the Upayoga utilities. So I thought we will do the same thing for this particular topic of Brahman or Ishvara. The first thing is, what is the definition of this Ishvara or Brahman? Let's talk about the definition of the Ishvara. As I said, different schools give different definitions of this very idea. If you look at the Upanishads, so as I said, the idea of Brahman and the idea of Ishvara are different in certain philosophies. The idea of Brahman and Ishvara are same in certain philosophies, and so on. Okay. So now if you look at the Upanishads, the definition of the the Brahman in Upanishads, you get multiple vakyas that would define this Brahman. One of which is the one that appears in the Taittiriya Upanishad that says, Yato va imani bhutani jayante, yena jatani jivanti, yat prayanti abhishamvishanti, tad vijignasasva tad brahma. So that's defining what Brahman is. If you look at the other Upanishads, the definition of Brahman is given as Prajnanam Brahma, okay, or Vijnanam Brahma, and so on. Now, if you start from the definition of the Taittiriya Upanishads, it says, Yato va imani bhutani jayante, yena jatani jivanti, yat prayanti abhisamvishanti, tad brahma. Anybody who knows elementary Sanskritam can interpret this. Yato va imani bhutani jayante, yena jatani jivanti, yat prayanti abhisamvishanti, tad brahma. The one from which all these bhutas originate. Yato va imani bhutani jayante, yena jatani jivanti. The one from which or from whose help that this lives on. Yat prayanti abhisamvishanti. The one from which to which all these bhutas would go ultimately is the Brahman. Okay. So if you distill this, one can say that, I mean, we all know this definition, right? The definition of Brahman to be the one who is, or the Ishvara or God to be the creator, the destroyer, the perpetuator, and so on. So that's the outwardly meaning that one would get from this Upanishad, right? If you look at the other definition, Vijnanam Brahma, Prajnanam Brahma, and all that, that would say that it is the consciousness. Again, as I said, no, English language has its limitations. So if you translate it into something, but I've been told to talk in English, so I have to use English words. So if I may use the word ultimate consciousness is what is called as Brahman. Now, some philosophies saw a contradiction between these two, right? And said that the creator Brahman, which the Taittiriya Upanishad talks about, using this Yato va imani bhutani jayante, is different from the ultimate consciousness Brahman, and they are two different entities. Okay? And I'm talking about the Advaita philosophy, where the ultimate consciousness that is called as Brahman is taken to be the adhisthana or the substratum for the illusionary projections that is done, which we perceive as universe. Okay, it's called the Aropa Adhisthana, Vivarta Upadana is the word that is used in Advaita, that the Brahman is that one consciousness upon which you project the entire universe, and the perception of this universe is mithya. Okay, so Brahman is that ultimate consciousness onto which the entire universe is projected. So this is one definition. So then what about this Taittiriya Upanishad that actually says that he's the Brahman is the creator, the destroyer, perpetuator? It says that is at the level of what they call as the Saguna Brahma or the Ishvara. So they says this, the Taittiriya Upanishad talks of the Ishvara, while the other Chandogya and Brihadaranyaka talks about the Brahman. So now this word God, I leave it to your interpretation. So what is God in Advaita Vedanta is up to anybody's imagination, right? So either it's Ishvara or it's the Brahman, according to the definition of the Advaita Vedanta. Now, if you look at the definition from the Advaita Vedanta perspective, they don't make this distinction that the so-called ultimate consciousness and the consciousness that is attributed with the qualities of creation, perpetuation, and so on are different. So they say that that's one and the same, and that is identified as Vishnu in Dvaita Vedanta. So that the word Brahman, Ishvara, Vishnu, all these words point out to the same object. Okay, so this is the definition. In fact, Madhvacharya gives a very nice definition of what Brahman is in his work called Anuvyakhyana. He says, Ato ashesha gunonnadham nirdosham yavadevahi tavadeva ishvaro nama. Okay. So this literally translates to, you can perceive the idea of Brahman or Ishvara as that one concept that has infinite attributes, ashesha gunonnadham nirdosham, and that does not have anything that you perceive as negative attributes. So the one that has no negative attributes and the one that is full with the positive, infinite positive attributes is what is called as Ishvara. And this is the same Ishvara that the Upanishadic texts point out to as Brahman. So Srimad Acharya makes this bold statement in his Brahma Sutra Bhashya that Brahma Shabdascha Vishnau Eva. He says the word Brahman directly points out to Vishnu. This is not the case with the other schools of Vedanta, where Vishnu is recognized as Ishvara, who is a part of the illusionary or the mithya perceptions that have been projected onto the conscious Brahman. Okay? But in the context of Dvaita Vedanta, the Ishvara and the Brahman point out to the exact same object. Okay? And as I said, right, so the definition of Brahman, again, so when people have tried to define what this Brahman is, so this is the distinction that has to be made, right? I mean, the Ishvara and Brahman points out to the exact same object in Dvaita Vedanta, and it points out to two different objects in the other schools of Vedanta. Now, what are the qualities and definitions of this particular Brahman? According to the Advaita Vedanta, it is Shuddha, it is Nirvikara, it is Nirguna. It does not have any attributes, right? It does not have any Vikara or any transformations, and it does not have any gunas because it is Nirguna. On the other hand, the definition of the same idea of Brahman according to Dvaita Vedanta is that it is infinitely full of all attributes. Ahesha gunonnadham nirdosham yavadevahi. Of course, it does not have any negative attributes which are referred to as doshas, but it is full of attributes. Now again, so this is a misnomer. When we perceive the Brahman of Dvaita Vedanta, it is not that there is a person and there are attributes there. I keep saying this always, that think of an attribute. Let's say that you consider an attribute called happiness. Okay? Think of happiness that is infinite in magnitude. Call that as Brahman. So whenever we talk of Brahman, right, we need not think of a person. Okay? So even the idea of a person, I keep asking this question, what do you mean by me? What do you mean by a jiva? What do you mean by us? Okay? At an elementary level, even jivas are some magnitude of jnana and ananda is what the scriptures say. Extend that, some of my young friends are here, you people know about number lines, right? So now if you take a small line segment, it has a finite magnitude. Now if you take a line that has infinite length, and if you represent any quality over the number line, okay, and that line that would have an infinite magnitude is what you can define as Brahman. So oftentimes what happens is whenever we think of God, this Semitic ideas of God comes into our mind. So it's like, somebody with some white robes sitting in some heaven, doing some magic, creation and all that. This is not the idea of the Brahman or Ishvara. Very, very different idea. The idea of Ishvara is that it's okay, somebody asked me this question, is this Ishvara an abstract entity? Right? So my counter question is, what do you mean by an abstract entity? Okay? Do we all understand what knowledge is? Do we? Actually we do, because we know that we are all sentient. You ask yourself whether you have knowledge. We all answer yes to that question, isn't it? Right? In the context of this AI and all that, right? I say that this AI does not identify or recognize that it has knowledge. We all know that we have knowledge. Now, is that an abstract entity? If you want to define an abstract entity as the one that cannot be physically measured, of course knowledge is an abstract entity. Okay. Now extend this idea of knowledge. I mean, suppose there were a way to measure this knowledge. Okay. Extend this into an infinite horizon and you define that as Ishvara or Brahman. So in that sense, a jiva or people like us are also knowledge by ourselves, even though we possess a physical body. But if there were a mechanism to measure knowledge, we would have a finite knowledge. Okay, so this idea of, see, again, this make it, this is a little subtle. There is the Shruti called Nehana Nasti Kinchana, right, which says that this idea of Brahman is such that you cannot differentiate Brahman or Ishvara with the attributes. Let me repeat. So it means that the usual analogy that is given is the following, right? Suppose you carve a nice doll from sugar. Now, what's a doll there and what is sugar? Right? So now, similar idea. Right? You suppose you carve a particular shape out of infinite happiness. You would see that Shankha Chakra and all those forms. Right? So one should not think that God is somebody who is sitting in some heaven and doing something and he's a person. See, if you have this idea of Brahman, we would not even ask questions like, is God a male or a female? Is he a man, right, or an animal? Right? So in one of the recent conversations I had, I gave this example. I like this example a lot. So we all know that white light is composed of all colors, right? Now you can get any color that you want from white light by putting a filter onto it. If anybody has studied elementary electrical engineering, you would know that if you want to get a signal with a particular frequency, all you need to do is take white noise and put a small filter and you will get that signal of that particular frequency. Similar thing can happen with this thing called Brahman. See, just like you can carve out a doll of any shape and size, you can actually make a buffalo doll from sugar syrup. You can make a male doll from the sugar syrup and so on. So you can have a Varaha god, you can have a Narasimha god, you can have that god, this god, doesn't matter. That's exactly what the Nehana Nasti Kinchana Shruti says. Perceive Brahman as white noise. Men, yeah, of course men, I mean, it's one frequency, you can take that out. Female, yeah, female, yes. Ishvara is female. You can make it Ishvara if you want, I mean, Akaranta full, the Strilinga Dirgha. Okay? So, Yadashesha Gunonnadham Nirdosham Yavadevahi Tavadeva Ishvaro Nama. So, one needs to start perceiving Ishvara from this angle. So, now what are these Rama, Krishna and all these Rupas that we talk about, right? As I said, they are the filters from this white light that we have. Even this Rama has this infinite attributes. So, this is a very beautiful example that you have this doll that is carved out of the sugar syrup. Okay. Now the question is, does this infinite attribute that we call as Brahman has akara or not? Okay. Then the question the counter question that I would ask is, what do you mean by akara? It's some physical form. Of course, it does not have a physical form. Why? Because it's jnana. Jnana does not have a prakrita or a physical form as we know it. In this sense, that the Upanishads talk about Brahman as nirvikara. It does not have a physical form that would perish as, unlike our bodies. Anything, you look at this chair, this has a physical and a finite physical form that would perish because it is made out of Prakriti. Anything that has a relationship with the the Prakriti, right, or the Sattva Rajas Tamo Guna of Prakriti is bound to perish. This thing that we have identified as Brahman or Ishvara does not have a physical form or association with Prakriti, and in this sense that the Upanishads and Vedas call that entity Nirguna. Right? It is indeed the fact that this Upanishads call this Brahman as Nirguna. Okay? And it also says that he is full of attributes. Atha kasmaduchyate brahmeti brahanto hyasmin gunaha iti brahman. So that's what Upanishad says. So these seems contradictory. Okay, I should have actually made a prelude to this talk, right? So when I said that people have identified and interpreted Upanishads and Vedas in different ways, there should be one guiding principle. Okay, and this principle I say that is common with any schools of knowledge systems, be it physics, be it mathematics or science or anything, that any theory or any hypothesis that you construct has to be self-consistent and non-contradictory. This is a fundamental tenet with which any knowledge system gets developed. You cannot say that contradictory is my reality. When there are schools of philosophy that would say that contradictory is reality, but I as an individual does not subscribe to that idea, because to me contradiction is bad. Okay, so Vyaghata vadi rashanka tarkashanka vadhirmata. I mean, if you all of you have done inductive proofs in mathematics, right? Where does suppose you are proving something by contradiction, the moment you observe a contradiction, you need to backtrack and change your assumption. Why would you do that if contradiction is your reality? Contradiction cannot be a reality. So any system that is constructed has to be constructed in such a way that it is self-consistent, in the sense that there are no internal contradictions between different parts of the system that you have constructed. Okay. So when we are talking about this idea of Brahman, and when we say that you perceive that as something that has infinite attributes, what do we do about those parts of Shrutis that would call this very Brahman Nirguna and Nirvikara? One needs to explain that as well, right? I mean, you cannot say that it is full of attributes at one place, and you cannot, and in other place you say that it has zero attributes. So that's contradiction. How do you reconcile this contradiction? Is via this particular argument that I just gave, that does white color has a color? No and yes. Depends on what do you mean by a color. Right? Does Brahman has guna? No and yes. Depends upon what do you mean by guna. If you are referring to things like happiness and consciousness and Shakti, etc., of course, it is the amalgamation of these attributes in the infinite horizon is by definition are Brahman. Now by guna, if you are referring to things like Sattva Rajas Tamo gunas that are attributed to Prakriti, of course the Brahman is Nirguna. So this is how you resolve the contradiction. Right? So now we have sort of defined. So I mean, see how different the idea of God or Brahman is between the Semitic way of looking at things and the Upanishadic way of seeing things. In other geographies, God has been referred to as something or somebody. The moment you talk of God, we perceive a person, isn't it? A person with, let's say, 1,000 hands, Sahasra Shirsha Purushaha, right? So, I mean, that Veda mantra is actually saying that Sahasra Shirsha Purushaha Sahasraksha Sahasrapad. It actually says that, look, this is an entity that can take any form. There are 1,000 forms, and the word 1,000 there is poetic, in the sense that that is why there is this idea of Bimba Pratibimba Bhava, right? Which means that Ishvara or Brahman actually has a form that physically looks like my form, my body's form, your body's form, and everybody's body's form. Because it is, as I said, right, and it is white in color. I mean, it can take any form. It has infinite forms, and it is in this sense that the Shruti calls Ishvara as Sahasra Shirsha Purushaha, Sahasraksha Sahasrapat, right? And also, when we talk of the infinite attributes, and the moment you stop seeing Brahman, right, as a person, can you restrict that idea to a particular space? See, a person will reside in heaven and not reside in, let's say, earth. How can infinite jnana cannot reside somewhere? This is the idea of the vyapti of Brahman. Now, does infinite consciousness or infinite jnana exist here? Yes, it does. Does it exist here? Yes, it does. Now, if you want that to take a particular form, of course you can take a form. I mean, like all you need is a dye. When we were talking about this, this sugar dolls, right? So, how do you construct a sugar doll? You just have to put a dye onto it. So that's the dye that the upasaka puts onto it, and it appears in whatever form that you want. So now there is no idea of God sitting in, let's say, some heaven or some Vaikuntha or something, some place, and not being here. See, if you ask me whether this thing does not exist in a place called Vaikuntha, no. I mean, of course, by definition, it exists everywhere. No, it also exists in Vaikuntha. It is. I mean, that's where that this idea of, very recently I made this statement also, which a lot of people had problems with, that I made a statement that this idea of worshipping in an idol is not very native to India. So a lot of people said, oh, I mean, what about this Agama Shastras that talk about idol, consecrating an idol and all that, and what about all these idols that people worship and all that? See, it's pretty simple. Just like this infinite consciousness Brahman exists in this phone, it also exists in an idol. You can Pratimayam Sannidhikrita Archakasya Tapobalat. So the subtlety is the following, that the manifestation or the sannidhana of that particular concept can happen at different levels at different places, depending upon how this upasaka or how the person who is perceiving that particular thing happens. And that's why you need a special place where a special upasaka, in fact, this is one other thing that goes incomplete if I do not make this statement. Srimad says, Pratimayam Sannidhikrita Archakasya Tapobalat. If there is a Pratima, the manifestation of this infinite attributed idea called Brahman only happens if the upasaka has tapasya. Doesn't happen otherwise. Okay? So that's the idea. So now the moment you start perceiving Brahman as something that is possessing infinite attributes also makes you perceive that as a person. Think of it like infinite attributes itself. Then the question of whether it's male or female, whether it's an animal or a person, whether it resides here or there, does not even exist. Right? On the other hand, because, I mean, if I say this, people would say that, oh, does it mean that that what about these forms like Rama, Krishna, and all this that we worship and so on? As I said, just because it can have any form, there is another form that it has. That's it. All forms are valid because it has a capability of taking all forms. Okay, so now what are the other questions? I think we are 30 minutes. Should we take a pause or go on?
One pause.
Right now or after 5-10 minutes? Okay, so maybe I'll just go for 5-10 minutes and then take a pause maybe. Yeah, so I just jot down a few ideas that I would want to present. Yeah, so the other question that would come is, we looked at the definition of things and the idea of saguna and nirguna. We also dealt with the idea of nirvikara and savikara. Okay. And there is this other question that, okay, now you talk of this idea of Brahman as the one that is infinite attributes. Now, is it one with the universe or different from the universe? This is one other question that people have been asking. Is it the universe itself? So now all that you are talking about and all pervasive and consciousness and all that, Is it same as the universe, or is it different from the universe? Now, somebody who would ask this question already has this idea of being different and being one. Think about it. Why would somebody ask this question if that somebody is a part of, I mean, if only one entity exists? Now, when you ask this question, see, ultimately, I keep saying this, all philosophical debates boil down to being linguistic debates. Okay, because the parishkaras and definitions and so on ultimately are playing with words and languages. Okay, so why do you use language? You use language to explain your experiences, and any philosophy should be built on something that cannot be sort of explained away using linguistic theoretics, which is one's own experience. Something that cannot be denied is one's own experience. See, if somebody tells me a philosophy that contradicts my experience, I would rather not buy that philosophy. Right? So suppose I'm happy and somebody is telling me that somebody is using all their might to prove that I'm not happy. Thank you. I mean, I don't need that philosophy. Srimad Acharya says this. Nahi kaschit sukhadyeshu samshayam kurute janaha. So there are some core fundamental experiences that are never denied. So there are undeniable experiences that no amount of linguistic philosophies can deny. Okay? And the idea of me being me is one such experience. No amount of philosophy can convince me that I am you. That's my experience. Because I cannot experience your experience, I cannot speak for you. I mean, if there is somebody that tells me that no, I have been convinced that I am you, I would say thank you. You cannot argue, right? Because as I said, you can argue on scriptures, you can argue on linguistics, but you cannot argue on experiences. Right? Okay. So now why did I say all this? It's because let's say that I define something which has infinite happiness. Now let me ask that question. Do I have infinite happiness? I have no iota of doubt in saying no. Because I have a lot of back pain coming to Bangalore, so I suffer. Right? So and I have lots of problems. Right? I can use inference to say that perhaps most people that seem like me, who are like human beings, I'm not sure if all of you are robots sitting here. Okay? Really, right? I mean, I cannot perceive you. There is no way that I can perceive you through my experience. Cheshtalingena satmatve paradehasya sadhite. So I can only infer that you might be similar to me, and I can speak for yourself saying that, oh, maybe because you look like me, act like me, you too do not have infinite happiness. I don't know, but at least for myself, I can say with ultimate confidence, without any doubt, that I do not have infinite happiness. I am bounded. I know that I am bounded. Okay. Now, given this, by definition, I am not God. This is by definition. I don't know if you people understand what that means. You know, if something that is by definition need not be proven. Right? So the moment I define Brahman as something that has, or not even that has, right? I mean, that's a wrong connotation to use. I define Brahman as infinite happiness. I know that I do not possess infinite happiness. By definition, I am not Brahman. I don't know about you. I don't know about you. In fact, when I say you, I don't even know what that word means. As I said, right? Anything outside of me is linguistics. But I can speak for myself that I am not that. So now this question of this difference of this idea called Brahman and the universe subsides at that particular point where I can very confidently say that I, or whatever I refer to as I, is not that infinite happiness. Make sense? And now extend this idea to every individual. See, if I get one other individual that would corroborate with my experience and he or she also says that I am not infinite happiness, then there are two things, right, that are not infinite happiness, and that level of difference is established. And I actually spoke about this as well, right? Whenever we speak of differences, whenever we ask this very question that whether we are different or same as God or Brahman, we already understand what difference means. We have already perceived this difference. You know why? That's because that is one of the core experiences that is not questioned. I know that I'm different from this. No amount of philosophy can deny this. Right? So this is about the definition of what Brahman, and as I said, right, within the realm of Dvaita philosophy, you call it Brahman, you call it Ishvara, you call it Vishnu. It refers to the same idea. Okay. So now we went to we looked at the idea of the definition of what Brahman is, and some of these questions like the Nirguna, Nirvikara, and the difference and so on. Right. I think should we stop now? Give a pause. For how long? It's already 6:15. If you want, I can just stop at 6:30 once for all.
Then we continue.
Take questions.
Questions have to be taken. He said after the talk.
But if there are so many questions, then we can have some of them here and then we can go for the.
So you
If
first
people
you
are
exhaust
ready to-
whatever you thought. Please continue.
Okay,
exhaust,
fine.
You exhaust your chain of thought, then we have.
Cannot be exhausted. Because as I said, this people have done so much of analysis on these things. So time is the only way I can stop, right? Okay, so now this is about the definitions. Next comes the epistemological part of it. Now, Ishvara eva kim pramanam. You can define whatever you want. I can define that there is a huge animal that has 10 heads and 5 legs and 5 trunks and whatever it is golden in color and so on. Of course you can define, but now what is the proof that it exists? See, once Lakshana Pramanabhyam Vastu Swarupa Nirdharanam. So now we talked about the definition. Okay, good, you made some definitions. Now what is the evidence of all this? That's what is called as epistemology. Almost all schools of Vedanta that talk about Brahman and Ishvara unanimously say that this idea of Ishvara cannot be perceived through the sensory perception. Okay, and there is this one school of philosophy which is called the Nayayika Darshana or Nyaya Darshana, who would say that this idea of Ishvara, even though their definition of Ishvara is very different from whatever I just gave. The definition that I gave is from the perspective of the Dvaita school of philosophy. While the definition of Brahman and Ishvara is very different, when comes to when it is the question of perception that we are talking about, different schools speak in different languages. Only Nayayikas say that, or the Nyaya school of philosophy says that Ishvara can be perceived through inference. Okay, so just like we perceive the presence of electricity in a live wire, okay, we do not perceive it. We only perceive the effect. Even if you touch it, you don't perceive electricity, you just perceive a shock, right? Or rather, when you see a load like an electric bulb glowing, you know that there is some source of energy, the electrons are flowing and so on. It's the usual creator argument that these Nayayikas give. Just like the Semitic people, the religion that define the God. Oh, God is somebody or something that created this world. So they say their argument goes something like this. Because this world was created, there should be a creator. This is an inference. Now, how do you know that there is an Ishvara? Because this is created, and everything that I see that has been created has a creator. Because this world is created, and hence there should be a creator. It's a very, it's a royally flawed argument, and a lot of philosophers have just destroyed this argument right, left, and center. Okay, because a lot of questions. You will be very surprised to know that Vedantis find hundreds of flaws in this argument. Despite being people who would accept the idea of Ishvara or Brahman, they say that you cannot prove the existence of Ishvara through this argument. I'll give you just a couple of pointers so as to why this argument is flawed. For one, how do you know that all this was created? So this chair was created, of course. I can track back to the person who actually created this chair. This was created, I can go and trace back to the person who created this and so on. So there's a big mountain. How do you know that it was actually created in the first place? Right? And what is this process of creation? And anything that is complex enough has been created by 100 people. So now how do you know that there's only one God who is sitting somewhere has created all this magically? There can be 1,000 people, a committee of people who actually made all these mountains. Who knows? Lots of questions. Now this creator argument is flawed. One cannot, and all the Vedanta people recognize this fact that the Brahman and Ishvara cannot be perceived through inferences, because one can find arguments in logic. Now the perception is gone, the sensory perception is gone, and inferential knowledge is gone. There is only one thing that is remaining, which we call as the agama. Right? So even there, I don't want to dwell deeper into that. One can easily say that what is agama at a very high level? It is the words. We get a lot of, see, you are getting some knowledge because I am saying something. You are not inferring what I am saying, neither are you perceiving what I am saying through your senses. You are getting this knowledge through my words. Right? This is agama. So they say that Ishvara has to be perceived by agama. So now what is agama? Agama is someone's words. Now why should we trust someone? Everybody can make mistakes. If you are not trusting a foolproof logic, what makes you trust some random person who is saying that God exists? It's in fact more foolish than actually relying on inferences. And if you deeply look at it, today's modern science does all their discoveries using two of the epistemological methods, which is the pratyaksha and anumana, the perception and the inferences. That's it. They don't consider agama as one means of getting knowledge. Rightly so, because if I tell you that look, this table is not a table but it is an elephant, it's an agama. Why don't you take it? You would ask me for evidences, right? You would say, oh, why is it? Give me evidence. So there is no reason. See, if you start perceiving things because somebody said so, there are 1,000 people said 1,000 things in this universe. 1,000 contradictory things. Okay. Now, whom do you trust? In fact, our scriptures very rightly say that don't even trust us. The ones who write those scriptures say that don't trust us, because you have no means to know that we don't cheat you. So there are 10 different acharyas, right? One acharya has this parampara, the other acharya has this parampara. Why should you pick one acharya over the other? Is it just because we were born there? I would not do that. Let's say that you are born in acharya A's parampara in this birth, and you are a staunch follower of that. The next birth, your indulgence just gets switched, and you are born in acharya B's parampara. Now what happens? Now you start refuting the same siddhanta that you proposed in the previous birth, right? That's not the way it should happen. So these are called Paurushaya agamas. They are of no use. You should not trust anybody's words. That's very well documented and identified. And the only way to perceive Brahman or Ishvara is through the Apaurushaya agama, right? Again, it's for another day's discussion. So what is this idea of Apaurushaya agama? That's a very, very high level outset. It is one sort of agama that is free from human intervention. Now you can ask me questions. Can there exist an agama where there is no human intervention and so on? That's a very valid and deeply epistemological question that needs a longer discussion. So now take it as a fact. You don't have to, because I just said that you should not take anything by face value. But yeah, so this is what has been said, that there exists something called an Apaurushaya agama, and that is the only source of knowing Brahman. This has been very well documented and identified. Okay. Now, what about, see, we do have a lot of, and by the way, what are these Apaurushaya agamas? And they have been identified as Vedas and Upanishads. All the other scriptures that you see, which are the Puranas and the Smritis and so on, they have been indeed written, and they get their Pramanya or authority because they do not contradict Vedas. So if you find something that is contradictory in something in Puranas or Paurushayagamas that contradict Vedas, one needs to give that up. It's very well documented and identified that Puranas are taken authoritative just because, in fact, if you find something, let's say, in someone's scripture that is in corroboration with the Apaurushaya Agama, take it. It is in this sense that I always say that modern science, that is experiential and backed by multiple experiential evidences, are not contradictory to the so-called spiritual journey because they corroborate with the Vedic knowledge. Okay. In fact, again, this goes deeply into epistemological debate. Madhvacharya emphatically says that if you get something that is against your experiences in Veda, then you need to reinterpret Veda. You cannot remove your experience. Nahi pratyaksha siddham annena kenapi badhyam drishtam. So the ultimate way of knowing things is through experiencing. Okay. So anyway, so because you cannot experience Brahman at this point in time, there is the only way to do it epistemologically. There is the only way to do it is through Apaurushayagamas, and this has been established and acknowledged by all schools of Vedanta. So that is why the Brahma Jignasa or the debates on Brahman only happens through the Vedic texts. Okay, the ultimatum of the Dvaita debate culminates in interpretation of Vedas and Upanishads. Right? Because you cannot debate about Brahman in an experiential plane, right? You need to go into the Apaurushaya realm, and that's the only way to do it. This is about the epistemological way of doing it. So, the last piece, maybe I'll just take 10 minutes and stop for questions. The last piece is okay. There is an entity called Brahman which has infinite attributes and whatnot, and we know that it exists because Vedas say so. Why is that we need to believe in Vedas? Is again, as I said, it's a separate discussion. The third question is, which is important and relevant to me as an individual, and perhaps you as an individual, right? Is that why is it all relevant? See, if I say that there exists a huge tree on Himalayan hills, fine, let it be there. What do I care? So now, okay, there is an infinite attributes entity that we call as Brahman that exists. Why do I care? Okay. Now this question comes up, and there's a very nice, very beautiful explanation that has been given. Is that the first question that Acharya asked is, now introspect and tell me what is that you need. All of us say that, oh, I need this, I need that, and so on. So now I can ask you, I can take you one level down and ask you, why do you need that? Oh, let's work through an example. If I ask him what does he need, he would say, let's say, I want to top my class. Okay, fine. So do you? I don't know. Yeah. So maybe he does. So now then I'll ask him, why do you have to top your class? Because he says, oh, something else, I need to get into a college, and why do you have to get into a college? And I can keep asking that question. Where does it stop? It stops at one level where I say that I want to be happy. Now, if I ask you, why do you want to be happy? Is that a valid question? That's actually not a valid question. I would say, I just want to be happy. Don't ask me questions after that. You know why it stops there? It stops there because it's core experiential aspect of an individual. As I said, anything that has to do with the experiential reality of a jiva cannot be questioned, and we don't want that to be questioned. Everything stops at happiness. We do everything for that. Okay. So now comes the question. Okay, fine. I do everything because I want to be happy. Now what? Now why? What is the relevance of this thing called Brahman that you talked about this? So the theory that is constructed is as follows. The very Upanishads that talk about Brahman also tell you that, look, all the happiness that you are seeking is actually within you. You don't have to seek it outside. But it does not deny the happiness that you get from outside, but it also recognizes the fact that every kind of happiness that you derive from outside sources is bound to end. And that's a matter of our experience. Can you think of a scenario where something outside of you gave you happiness that lasted for eternity? I mean, this very body does not last for eternity, right? I mean, what do we say? Okay. Now, think about it. I mean, it is in Mahabharata, in this conversation between Yudhishthira and Yaksha, there's one question that this Yaksha asked Yudhishthira, that what do you think is the greatest surprises of all? The answer goes as follows. Ahanyahani bhutani gamishyanti amalayam sheshaha sthavaramicchanti kimascharya matah param. He says, every damn single second, people die and leave their body. And the rest believe that they are eternal. What can be more surprising than this? Ahanyahani bhutani gamishyanti amalayam sheshaha sthavaramicchanti kimascharya matah param. So now just imagine that the very fact that everything that we do in this life ceases to exist after, let's say, 50 years. How dreadful is that thought? So we build houses, we accumulate that, this and so on, right? We accumulate titles, we become whatever, right? We become famous and whatnot and so on. And it's a matter of damn 50 years. That's it, gone. So now, if everything that you are doing is because you seek happiness, and the very vehicle to have that happiness, which is your body and everything that you accumulate, cease to exist after a time that is as short as 50, 60 years, how disappointing is that? See, people talk of going to Mars and sustainable growth and so on. That's not at all ambitious. Everybody tells you to be ambitious, right? Oh, don't settle for less. You need to be ambitious. And this entire idea of capitalistic and community has been created via this idea of being ambitious. Produce more, consume more, and that's how you can buy happiness, is the idea. My hypothesis is that they are idiots because they don't recognize this very fact that in spite of everything that you do, there's this dreadful thing as death that would stop everything. Now, what's being ambitious? The pinnacle of ambition is to make a hypothesis that death is not your end. That's being ambitious. Recognizing the fact that this body that we have is a transition phase in this infinite horizon of our existence, and we do not cease to exist in spite of this body being ceasing to exist, is what I call as ambitious. That's why the very first Upadesha that Krishna gives to Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita is about eternity of soul. Nahyevasam jatunasam natvam neme janadhipaha nachaiva bhavishyamaha sarve vayam atah param. Because that's the bedrock of Indian philosophical schools, that this body that you possess is a very, very small, tiny, transitionary phase of your journey as a soul. Now, if you start looking at your life from this perspective, everything changes. A lot of people ask me this question: if Indians were so intelligent and so on, why didn't they invent electricity? Why didn't they invent this and that and so on? Because they knew that in spite of doing all that, you are going to die. What's the point? Now, there is something called an opportunity cost. All of you know this, right? So what do you mean by opportunity cost? Now, you don't want to do something that, if done, will prohibit you from obtaining something that is much more gainful, right? That's your opportunity cost. They all recognize that this human life is a huge opportunity cost. Don't waste it in building electricity or creating, some more bright light or a way to communicate from here to there and so on. They knew how to use this. If you look at Kathopanishad, right, this guy Nachiketa, the boy of 7, says that api sarvam jeevitam alpameva tavaiva vaha tava nritta geetam. When Yama lures him with all kinds of materialistic comforts and says that, oh, I will make you live for 1,000 years, he says, what 1,000 years? I am talking about infinite existence here. Anybody who knows elementary math would know that you put 1,000 below, infinity below 1,000, what would happen? It will go to 0. Doesn't matter. 1,000 years, you give me infinite years. See, that is why all these demons or Rakshasas were very, they were intelligent enough to ask for the avajyatva, right? They didn't want to die because they knew nobody asked for 1,000 years of existence or 10,000 years of existence. They asked for avajyatva because they knew that doesn't matter. You live for 1,000 years, you live for 50 years, 60 years, how does it matter? All Indian people, so-called Indian people, right, who were intelligent enough, knew this fundamental truth of life. And to my mind, nobody can be more ambitious than them. Think about it, right? There cannot be bigger ambition. Even if, let's say that everything of this that they say is a big lie. Right? That, okay, you cease to exist after this birth. Let's say that whatever you identify as you cease to exist after this birth. Even in that case, it is worth pursuing that goal of infinite existence. Why? Look at how a scientist works. They make a hypothesis that seems impossible. That's what being ambitious is all about, right? If somebody dreams to be building a colony in Jupiter, you would not call them a fool. You would call them a great ambitious thinker, isn't it? Now, if somebody thinks about conquering death and infinite existence, why would you not call that person infinitely ambitious? This very idea of existence beyond this mortal body is such a great idea. Okay, anyway, so let's come back to that. So now, given that we have this, we are looking at this framework, okay, that we continue to exist, and the existence of whatever I refer to as I is not time bounded, and the fact that all I seek is happiness. Now, what is my objective? Now, my objective is to be happy through that infinite temporal horizon. I don't want to exist in a very dreadful and a sorrowful state, isn't it? I want to stay blissful. If I exist, the first hypothesis is that I am going to exist beyond this temporal horizon, and my existence is boundless temporally. Now, if I buy that hypothesis, the very next question that comes to my mind is, my existence has to be blissful. If my existence is not going to be blissful, so ask somebody who is suffering with a life-threatening disease, they would rather cease to exist than existing with that mind frame, right? So I don't want to exist in a state of sorrow. I would want to exist in a blissful state. Okay, fine. Now, there is another idea that was just conveyed, that anything that is external is going to cease to exist. Now, imagine a state where you exist for infinity and you don't have access to a body. What do? That's a very bad state to exist. So, again, the Upanishad comes and says that, look, don't worry. In fact, our scriptures say this, tasya apto bandhuriva vedaha. So, somebody who is thinking about all this, seeing no respite anywhere, okay, looking for answers, Veda comes to the rescue, and just like a dear friend, it says, don't worry, the happiness that you are seeking is internal. Don't try to find it outside of you. Whatever you are searching for is not outside. Okay? In fact, by the way, I'll tell you, all this I'm saying is a part of a couple of paragraphs that have been documented in a work called Vishnu Tattva Viranaya of Sri Madhacharya and the corresponding Tika. At the end of something called Karyatavada, he writes such beautiful paragraph. Okay, so I mean that's exactly what I'm saying. Paraphrasing it in this 1 hour. Okay, so it says Tasya Apto Bandhuriva Vedaha. The Veda says that don't worry, the happiness that you are seeking is completely internal. It does not come from outside. The moment somebody makes this statement, the next question is, if it's internal, why am I not experiencing it right now? Okay, that's because you have been in contact, or you have been completely covered with something that is not you, which is what we call as the samsara or prakriti. So think of yourself like a light that has been covered with some obstacle that is not letting you experience yourself. That's why I say this 100 times. The very idea of mukti or moksha is, Bhagavata says, no, muktir hitva anyatha rupam swarupena vyavasthitihi. It's not acquiring something. It's giving up everything that you are not. Because all you are seeking, which is happiness, is within you. Okay, fine. Now tell me, how do I get rid of everything that I am not myself? Okay? Here is where our Brahman or God fits in. If we were capable enough to get rid of everything that we are not, we would have done it by now already, no? Why would we suffer? We are not able to control our spouses. Come on, I mean, what are we talking about? Right? So we are not capable. So it's again a matter of our experience that we are not capable of doing this. This very Vedas and Upanishad says that this infinite attributes that I talked of as Brahman, right? Keep contemplating on that. So that's what is called as dhyana or bhakti. Okay? The more you do it, the more reflections of that infinite attributes falls on you. And because this bandha, the prakriti, is again material, it is jada, right? It's actually material. The effulgence of that infinite happiness that we just spoke about is strong enough to take that off over a period of time. That's called sadhana. So that's why Ishvara or Brahman is called as Sukha Sadhana in Shastras. So long story short, we need Brahman to be ourselves. Why do we need to be ourselves? Because we want to be happy. And that's the only way to be happy is to be ourselves. And we need Brahman to be ourselves. Jignasothat jnanajat tat prasadadeva muchyate. So now you can fit everything in the entire gamut of Vedanta within the story that I just told you. The bhakti, the karma, everything that we do can be accommodated in this hypothesis. Right? Look how experiential this is. So ultimately what we seek is happiness. And that can only happen when you become you. Or, see, again, sorry, I will take back that statement because you are you already, right? I mean, you cannot become you. That's a bad statement to make. That's only possible when you get rid of everything that is not you. That's the correct statement to make. And to get rid of everything that is not you, you need reflections from something that is capable enough, whose reflection is strong enough to take that covering that you have on you. And how do you ensure that you are under the watch, or rather we call it the field of view in engineering, right? There's a field of view. How do you ensure that you are under the field of view of that particular infinite attributes that I talked about? Keep thinking about it. That's called bhakti. Mahatma jnana purvastu sudhuda sarvatodhika sneha bhakti. So the word that is used is sneha. If you look at the dhatu part of Sanskrit, right? Sneha means, you know what sneha means? It's stickiness. So you stick to that, sticking to that infinite qualities that I just spoke of and called Brahma is what is called as bhakti. And there are multiple ways of getting stuck into that. Okay, so this is the story of God according to me. As I said in the very beginning, this is my story of God, which aligns to the Madhvacharya story of God. Okay, and I like that story because the other stories that I have read sort of seems contradictory and a lot of gaps here and there. It's one again, that's my opinion. See, opinions are free. You should not hold someone because they are expressing their opinion as long as they are giving you disclaimers. So I am telling you that this is my opinion, that the story, the Madhva story of God is something that I like. Now in this entire story, right, I mean, we are running out of time, maybe just 2 more minutes and stop. Yeah. All the people, Western philosophers, that spoke against the idea of God, spoke because their definition of God is not this. In all Semitic religions, God is somebody who is a person sitting in heaven and creating you. Now, one simple question that all these people asked is something called problem of evil. If he's creating a world, why would he create a world which has diseases? Why would he create a world that has evil? So now it's very funny that God makes you or gives you a body, or he puts you in a situation or a scenario where you are forced not to believe in him, and finally you are penalized for that. I mean, how big a sadist is that God? I cannot imagine a bigger sadist than such a person, no? See, it's like making you not believe me and penalizing you because you don't believe me. Why? So this is the problem of evil and so on. None of this even arise when we talk of the Upanishadic God. Let's call him or her or it or whatever, right? Brahman. Yadashesha gunonnadham nirdosham yavadevahi tavadeva ishvaro nama. Such a powerful definition that this shloka that I just quoted is from the Anuvyakhyana of Srimad Acharya. Such a powerful definition. Okay. So now again, I mean, as in this story, we were never created by God. We just exist just like God exists. God has no business